The economy of Hungary is a medium-sized, high-income, structurally, politically and institutionally open economy in Central Europe, and is part of the European Union's single market. The economy of Hungary experienced market liberalization in the early 1990s as part of the transition from a socialist economy to a market economy. Similarly to most countries in the former Eastern Bloc, Hungary is a member of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development since 1995, a member of the World Trade Organization since 1996, and a member of the European Union since 2004. The private sector accounts for more than 80% of the Hungarian gross domestic product. Foreign ownership of an investment in Hungarian firms are widespread, with cumulative foreign direct investment worth more than $70 billion. Hungary's main industries are mining, metallurgy, construction materials, processed foods, textiles, chemicals, and motor vehicles. Hungary's main agricultural products are wheat, corn, sunflower seed, potatoes, sugar beets, pigs, cattle, poultry, and dairy products. History of the Hungarian economy. Árpád age. At the age of feudalism, the key factor of the economic life was the land. The new economic and social orders formed the private ownership of the lands. There are three forms of existence: the royal, ecclesiastical and secular private estate. The royal estate of the Árpád dynasty had evolved from the tribal lands. The origin of the secular private holdings dates back to the conquest tribal common estates, which are increasingly in charge of the society and grows over private ownership of the becoming leaders. However, from the founding of the state, the royal gift also entered the multiplying factors secular private property line. This organization developed a feudal estate, which had two elements: the ancient estate and the possessions which were awarded by Saint Stephen I, and then the royal donations. Over the holder unrestricted right granted by the latter lineal heir almost returned to the king. In the order of the laws changed in 1351, which abolished the nobility's possessions for free disposal. It forbidden the nobility to sell their inherited land. The Carpathian Basin was more suitable for agriculture than large livestock grazing, and therefore increased steadily in the former weight. In the 11th and 12th centuries, natural farming and soil change tillage systems met grazing the animals, and they used the fertilized land until depletion. The most important tools for the agriculture were the plough and the ox. New Age Hungarian economy. Prior to the transition, the Hungarian economy prior to World War II was primarily oriented toward agriculture and small-scale manufacturing. Hungary's strategic position in Europe and its relative high lack of natural resources also have dictated a traditional reliance on foreign trade. For instance, its largest car manufacturer, Magomobile, produced a total of a few thousand units. In the early 1920s, the textile industry began to expand rapidly. By 1928 it became the most important industry in the foreign trade of Hungary, exporting textile goods worth more than 60 million pengos in that year. Companies like Misibacsi exported locomotives to India and South America. Its locomotive No. 601 was the largest and most powerful in Europe at the time. From the late 1940s, the communist government started to nationalize the industry. At first only factories with more than 100 workers were nationalized, later this limit was reduced to only 10. In the agriculture, the government started a disastrous program of collectivization. From the early 1950s more and more new factories were built. This rapid and forced industrialization followed the standard Stalinist pattern in an effort to encourage a more self-sufficient economy. Most economic activity was conducted by state-owned enterprises or cooperatives and state farms. In 1968, Stalinist self-sufficiency was replaced by the new economic mechanism, which reopened Hungary to foreign trade. gave limited freedom to the workings of the market, and allowed a limited number of small businesses to operate in the services sector. Although Hungary enjoyed one of the most liberal and economically advanced economies of the former Eastern Bloc, both agriculture and industry began to suffer from a lack of investment in the 1970s. And Hungary's net foreign debt rose significantly, from $1 billion in 1973 to $15 billion in 1993, due largely to consumer subsidies and unprofitable state enterprises. In the face of economic stagnation, Hungary opted to try further liberalization by passing a joint venture law, instating an income tax, and joining the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. By 1988, Hungary had developed a two-tier banking system and had enacted significant corporate legislation which paved the way for the ambitious, market-oriented reforms of the post-communist years. Transition to a market economy. After the fall of communism, the former Eastern Bloc had to transition from a one-party, centrally planned economy to a market economy with a multi-party political system. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Eastern Bloc countries suffered a significant loss in both markets for goods and subsidizing from the Soviet Union. Hungary, for example, lost nearly 70% of its export markets in Eastern and Central Europe. The loss of external markets in Hungary left 800,000 unemployed people, because all the unprofitable and unsalvageable factories had been closed. Another form of Soviet subsidizing that greatly affected Hungary after the fall of communism was the loss of social welfare programs. Because of the lack of subsidies and a need to reduce expenditures, many social programs in Hungary had to be cut in an attempt to lower spending. As a result, many people in Hungary suffered incredible hardships during the transition to a market economy. Following privatization and tax reductions on Hungarian businesses, unemployment suddenly rose to 12% in 1991, gradually decreasing until 2001. Economic growth, after a fall in 1991 to minus 11.9%, gradually grew until the end of the 1990s at an average annual rate of 4.2%. With the stabilization of the new market economy, Hungary has experienced growth in foreign investment, with her cumulative foreign direct investment totaling more than $60 billion since 1989. The Antal government of 1990–94 began market reforms with price and trade liberation measures, a revamped tax system, and a nascent market-based banking system. By 1994, however, the cost of government overspending and a hesitant privatization had become clearly visible. Cuts in consumer subsidies led to increases in the price of food, medicine, transportation services, and energy. Reduced exports to the former Soviet bloc and shrinking industrial output contributed to a sharp decline in GDP. Unemployment rose rapidly to about 12% in 1993. The external debt burden, one of the highest in Europe, reached 250% of annual export earnings, while the budget and current account deficits approached 10% of GDP. The devaluation of the currency, without effective stabilization measures, such as indexation of wages, provoked an extremely high inflation rate that in 1991 reached 35% and slightly decreased until 1994, growing again in 1995. In March 1995, the government of Prime Minister Gyula Horn implemented an austerity program, coupled with aggressive privatization of state-owned enterprises and an export-promoting exchange rate regime, to reduce indebtedness, cut the current account deficit, and shrink public spending. By the end of 1997, the consolidated public sector deficit decreased to 4.6% of GDP, with public sector spending falling from 62% of GDP to below 50%. The current account deficit was reduced to 2% of GDP, and government debt was paid down to 94% of annual export earnings. The government of Hungary no longer requires IMF financial assistance and has repaid all of its debt to the fund. Consequently, Hungary enjoys favorable borrowing terms. Hungary's sovereign foreign currency debt issuance carries investment-grade ratings from all major credit rating agencies. Although recently the country was downgraded by Moody's, S&P and remains on negative outlook at Fitch. In 1995 Hungary's currency, the forint, became convertible for all current account transactions, and subsequent to OECD membership in 1996, for almost all capital account transactions as well. Since 1995, Hungary has pegged the forint against a basket of currencies, and the central rate against the basket is devalued at a pre-announced rate, originally set at 0.8% per month. The forint is now an entirely free-floating currency. The government privatization program ended on schedule in 1998. 80% of GDP is now produced by the private sector, and foreign owners control 70% of financial institutions, 66% of industry, 90% of telecommunications, and 50% of the trading sector. After Hungary's GDP declined about 18% from 1990 to 1993 and grew only 1% to 1.5% up to 1996. Strong export performance has propelled GDP growth to 4.4% in 1997, with other macroeconomic indicators similarly improving. These successes allowed the government to concentrate in 1996 and 1997 on major structural reforms such as the implementation of a fully funded pension system, reform of higher education, and the creation of a national treasury. Remaining economic challenges include reducing fiscal deficits and inflation, maintaining stable external balances, and completing structural reforms of the tax system, healthcare, and local government financing. Recently, the overriding goal of Hungarian economic policy has been to prepare the country for entry into the European Union, which it joined in late 2004. Prior to the change of regime in 1989, 65% of Hungary's trade was with CUMCAN countries. By the end of 1997, Hungary had shifted much of its trade to the West. Trade with EU countries and the OECD now comprises over 70% and 80% of the total, respectively. Germany is Hungary's single most important trading partner. The US has become Hungary's sixth-largest export market, while Hungary is ranked as the 72nd largest export market for the US. Bilateral trade between the two countries increased 46% in 1997 to more than $1 billion. The U.S. has extended to Hungary most favored nation status, the generalized system of preferences, overseas private investment corporation insurance, and access to the Export-Import Bank. With about $18 billion in foreign direct investment since 1989, Hungary has attracted over one-third of all FDI in Central and Eastern Europe, including the former Soviet Union. Of this, about $6 billion came from American companies. Foreign capital is attracted by skilled and relatively inexpensive labor, tax incentives, modern infrastructure, and a good telecommunications system. By 2006, Hungary's economic outlook had deteriorated. Wage growth had kept up with other nations in the region. However, this growth has largely been driven by increased government spending. This has resulted in the budget deficit ballooning to over 10% of GDP and inflation rates predicted to exceed 6%. This prompted Nouriel Roubini, a White House economist in the Clinton administration, to state that Hungary is an accident waiting to happen. Privatization in Hungary. In January 1990, the State Privatization Agency was established to manage the first steps of privatization. Because of Hungary's $21.2 billion foreign debt, the government decided to sell state property instead of distributing it to the people for free. The SPA was attacked by populist groups because several companies' management had the right to find buyers and discuss sale terms with them, thus stealing the company. Another reason for discontent was that the state offered large tax subsidies and environmental investments, which sometimes cost more than the selling price of the company. Along with the acquisition of companies, foreign investors launched many greenfield investments. The centre-right Hungarian Democratic Forum government of 1990 to 1994 decided to demolish agricultural cooperatives by splitting them up and giving machinery and land to their former members. The government also introduced a recompensation law which offered vouchers to people who had owned land before it was nationalized in 1948. These people could exchange their vouchers for land previously owned by agricultural cooperatives, who were forced to give up some of their land for this purpose. Small stores and retail businesses were privatized between 1990 and 1994. However, greenfield investments by foreign retail companies like Tesco, Cora and IKEA had a much bigger economic impact. Many public utilities, including the National Telecommunications Company, Metalv, the national oil and gas conglomerate MOL Group, and electricity supply and production companies were privatized as well. Though most banks were sold to foreign investors, the largest bank, National Savings Bank, remained Hungarian-owned. 20% to 20% of the shares were sold to foreign institutional investors and given to the social security organizations, 5% were bought by employees, and 8% was offered at the Budapest Stock Exchange. Hungary's economy since 1990 reaching 1995, Hungary's fiscal indices deteriorated. Foreign investment fell as well as judgment of foreign analysts on economic outlook. Due to high demand in import goods, Hungary also had a high trade deficit and budget gap, and it could not reach an agreement with the IMF, either. After not having a Minister of Finance for more than a month, Prime Minister Gyula Horn appointed Lajos Bokros as Finance Minister on 1 March 1995. He introduced a string of austerity measures on 12 March 1995 which had the following key points. One-time 9% devaluation of the forint, introducing a constant sliding devaluation, 8% additional customs duty on all goods except for energy sources, limitation of growth of wages in the public sector, simplified and accelerated privatization. The package also included welfare cutbacks, including abolition of free higher education and dental service, reduced family allowances, childcare benefits, and maternity payments depending on income and wealth, lowering subsidies of pharmaceuticals, and raising retirement age. These reforms not only increased investor confidence, but they were also supported by the IMF and the World Bank. However, they were not welcomed widely by the Hungarians. Bokros broke the negative record of popularity. 9% of the population wanted to see him in an important political position, and only 4% were convinced that the reforms would improve the country's finances in a big way. In 1996, the Ministry of Finance introduced a new pension system instead of the fully state-backed one. Private pension savings accounts were introduced, which were 50% social security based and 50% funded. In 2006, Prime Minister Ferenc Gyurcsány was re-elected on a platform promising economic reform without austerity. However, after the elections in April 2006, the Socialist coalition under Gyurcsány unveiled a package of austerity measures which were designed to reduce the budget deficit to 3% of GDP by 2008. Because of the austerity program, the economy of Hungary slowed down in 2007. 2008-2009 financial crisis, declining exports, reduced domestic consumption and fixed asset accumulation hit Hungary hard during the financial crisis of 2008. making the country enter a severe recession of -6.4%, one of the worst economic contractions in its history. On the 27th of October 2008, Hungary reached an agreement with the IMF and EU for a rescue package of $25 billion, aiming to restore financial stability and investors' confidence. Because of the uncertainty of the crisis, banks gave less loans, which led to a decrease in investment. This, along with price awareness and fear of bankruptcy, led to a fallback in consumption, which then increased job losses and decreased consumption. Even further, inflation did not rise significantly, but real wages decreased. The fact that the euro and the Swiss franc are worth a lot more in forints than they were before affected a lot of people. According to the Daily Telegraph, statistics show that more than 60% of Hungarian mortgages and car loans are denominated in foreign currencies. After the election in 2010 of the new Fidesz party government of Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, Hungarian banks were forced to allow the conversion of foreign currency mortgages to the forint. The new government also nationalized $13 billion of private pension fund assets, which could then be used to support the government debt position. Present-day Hungarian economy. The economy showed signs of recovery in 2011 with decreasing tax rates and a moderate 1.7% GDP growth. From November 2011 to January 2012, all three major credit rating agencies downgraded Hungarian debt to a non-investment speculative grade, commonly called junk status. In part, this is because of political changes creating doubts about the independence of the Hungarian National Bank. European Commission President José Manuel Barroso wrote to Prime Minister Viktor Orbán stating that new central bank regulations allowing political intervention seriously harm Hungary's interests, postponing talks on a financial aid package. Orbán responded, "If we don't reach an agreement, we'll still stand on our own feet." The European Commission launched legal proceedings against Hungary on the 17th of January 2012. The procedures concern Hungary's central bank law, the retirement age for judges and prosecutors, and the independence of the Data Protection Office, respectively. One day later, Orbán indicated in a letter his willingness to find solutions to the problems raised in the infringement proceedings. On the 18th of January he participated in plenary session of the European Parliament, which also dealt with the Hungarian case. He said, "Hungary has been renewed and reorganized under European principles." He also said that the problems raised by the European Union can be resolved easily, simply and very quickly. He added that none of the EC's objections affected Hungary's new constitution. GDP picked up in 2014, and based on the Commission's winter 2015 forecast, it is projected to have accelerated to 3.3%. This is attributed to growing domestic demand with a significant contribution of gross fixed capital formation. The surge in growth, however, was supported by temporary measures and factors, such as the stepped-up absorption of EU funds and the central bank's funding for growth scheme of subsidized loans to small and medium-sized enterprises.